Hello ladies and gentle pigs, welcome. Over my shoulder there, that's Ernie 2019 Royal Enfield Classic 500, which I've had the pleasure of owning for the last 8 months or so. Now we're just about to reach 1,000 miles, so it's very nearly run in, and now I've got some miles under my belt. I think it's about time I did a proper review based on my experience. Now you might be watching this out of interest, which is great, but if you're considering buying one, there's a couple of things that I would ask yourself. First of all, when you tell your partner you're going to clean your bike, will they understand when you return 12 hours later and say I'll finish the detailing in the morning? Because it is a pig to clean. It's all nooks and crannies and shiny bits. And one more thing to consider would be the running in period. The first 300 miles in particular is rather tedious. That's half throttle at 40 miles an hour, so do bear that in mind. If you can get past that, all good, it's well worth it. Now I think we'll get on the bike and take it for a ride before we attract too many magpies. Before I do, one of the first things I'll be covering is comfort, so I'll tell you my own stats. I'm 6'2", 33 inch inside leg, and weigh about 180 pounds, and I think I'm all in proportion. So I'll just give you a shot of me sat on the bike so you can see how it fits me, and then we'll go from there. Okay, here we are on the bike. I've actually just been home to change my jacket as I was sweltering. It's the first time I've tried this mesh. Anyway, not here to talk about that. So, comfort of the bike. Now I don't know what you think from seeing me sat on it, but I wouldn't have thought you'd want to be a much longer than me, and ideally probably a bit shorter, but even so it's still incredibly comfortable for me. I mean, the seat is just the right amount of firmness, and I think the springs actually do help on bumpy surfaces. The foot pegs are fairly far forward. That kind of leaves you in a armchair position. And the handlebars, I think I've put mine slightly forward, and it feels perfect for me. I can ride 2 to 2.5 hours without a break, no trouble at all, without suffering. Now going back to the foot pegs, they're actually on a solid bar, and that concerned me when I first got the bike, because I thought, what if you catch those with a steep lean angle? Things could get rather messy. Now so far I've just brushed the left hand peg, but this, however, has happened twice. Now that's me scraping the rear brake lever, which isn't a particularly pleasant feeling. And this kind of takes me into the bike's handling, which I have to be honest, surprised me. Now somehow I expected it to sort of wallow and buck and do all sorts, but it's actually surprisingly good. I mean, there's nothing special about the suspension. You've got basic non-adjustable right way up forks at the front, and step adjusting dual shocks on the rear, but it works. It feels planted and stable. Now it's not a particularly light bike, but you don't really feel that when you're riding it. It's quite manoeuvrable, and it's particularly good to ride at very low speeds. crawling in traffic, for instance. In fact, the easiest bike I've ridden. If I had to use a bike for a track stand competition, this would be the one. Now, I'm not saying the handling is perfect. When you're on a bumpy corner at say 60 miles an hour, it does wiggle a little bit, but it doesn't take anything away from your confidence. It still feels safe. Now, going back briefly to the foot pegs, something I will mention, as I said, they're on a solid bar, they're non-retractable, and you'll be reminded of that the first few times you pull it out of the garage or the turn it around in a driveway or what have you, because you will bash and bruise your shins a few times. They do seem somewhat in the way, but you do learn. I think we'll talk about the power, or the lack of it. Now, you're certainly not going to blow away your mate on his R1. That's just silly. But the power is ample, and it's really torquey, and it will pick up from way down the rev range. It's got enough to get past anything slow moving without needing a mile-long empty straight, and it will pull up any hills nicely. And I'll tell you what power it does have. It feels great. It really does, because you feel it through the foot pegs, you feel it through the handlebars. It really does feel alive, this bike. Now it's run in, or we're 7 miles away from being run in. It'll cruise happily at 60 miles an hour. I would say 50 to 55 was probably the sweet spot. And now if you wanted to up that, you could always opt for a 19 tooth front sprocket. But then I think you'd be taking away something from the acceleration, and then you're in the world of power commanders, free flow filter and exhaust. And once you start on that sort of thing, it's hard to stop, isn't it? I'm actually perfectly happy with the way he is. I'm quite happy to bimble along at 50 miles an hour all day long. There's something about the bike, and I don't know what it is, you just don't want to be frapping it everywhere. Riding it gives you a feeling of nostalgia. You feel like part of history. Just go out and enjoy the ride. Now, I actually recorded the walk around yesterday up on Dartmoor, and so that's what we'll cut to in a moment. But there was one thing I forgot to mention. In fact, I'm sure dozens of people will let me know of several things I forgot to mention, but one I know I forgot to mention was when I was talking about changes I've made to the bike so far. Well, day one I removed the back seat. It does come with a pillion seat, which I won't need on this bike, and I don't think it was particularly pretty, so off it went. Now that was quite a steep hill there, and it pulled up in fifth, no trouble. Now look at this. I don't know if you can see the speedo. There we go, 1,000 miles. So officially it's fully run in, although I'm still going to be a little bit careful for another 200 miles. So, a momentous occasion, and you were with me. I can't believe I'm in bloody Devon. I'm about a mile away from Cornwall. I wanted to get to Cornwall. Damn it. I tell you, this is so much fun to ride. Almost forgot to mention brakes, which is no big deal. It's single disc, front and rear, ABS, as like everything has these days. The first 100 miles they were sketchy as hell, but ever since then they've bedded in nicely and they've been fine and dandy. Now I haven't had to use them hard enough to trigger the ABS yet. But I've had to use them hard enough to know they feel safe. Okay, cut to the walk around. There he is, there's Ernie, ladies and gentle pigs. Now let's get the statistics out of the way. I'm reading these off. 49cc air-cooled single cylinder, 27 horsepower at 5,250 revs, 41.3 newton meters at 4,000 revs, 5-speed gearbox, which I have to say isn't the smoothest. I mean, you're not going to break any metatarsals selecting second, but there's a definite clunk. It does feel a little bit agricultural. 194 kilograms, and I would assume that's wet. There's a 13.5 litre fuel tank, which they're saying 32 kilometers per litre, which is somewhere around 90 miles a gallon. Now let's get the very basic controls. So your left bar, indicators, main beam dip, flasher, horn, fast idle, no choke obviously, because no carburetors these days. Right hand, it's just your kill switch, starter. In the middle, speedo, no trip counter. In the speedo you've got your main beam warning light, your neutral light, indicator light, which I have to say you can't really see in the sunshine. Low petrol light, there's no fuel gauge, and your engine management light. Other controls, no adjustment on your levers, not an issue for me, but maybe for others. You get a kickstart, which you may have noticed in the intro does work, although it can cost you several calories. Just ask Exeter Rider. And you get a centre stand as standard. Now I love the style. Nothing's changed in that respect since the 1950s when they were first produced. And I love the mud guards. Not only do they look great, they do an absolutely fantastic job of keeping the bike clean. Nothing like modern bikes, eh? I obviously went for the chrome graphite, but I think they look great, whatever colour. Right, I'll quickly run through what changes I've made. I've put on heated grips, I've put on a link for the battery tender, bar end mirrors, and the Hitchcock's slip-on exhaust. And Hitchcock's, by the way, have got an extensive catalogue of bits and bobs, so you can modify and upgrade until your heart's content. Some people said to me actually that you shouldn't do the exhaust until it's fully run in. Others said exactly the opposite, and I actually changed it at just after the 300-mile service, and I think it sounds beautiful, and it's often complimented on the sound. Okay, this is the sad part. It's a list of things that I would give a thumbs down. First of all, short service intervals. First service at 300 miles, then at 3,000, which I will probably change the oil before actually, but then yeah, 3,000, then every 3,000s after that. I don't like the number plate and light holder. I think that's really plasticky and tacky. The original exhaust was awful. The original mirrors were really spindly and frankly useless. They just shook like crazy, made you feel drunk, and all you could see was your elbows. Tube type tyres, always in the back of your mind, because there's no quick fix. With other bikes I would take a puncture kit with me. What else we got? Fuel gauge. I think it could really use a fuel gauge. I don't think that would have been a big ask. No locking fuel cap, which seems a bit odd these days. And finally, these side panels. This one's like a storage box, got a few tools in there, and this side is your air filter housing. Now, despite these rubber seals, they do let water in, so you really need to try and remember to dry those out when you've washed the bike, because they do collect water and they're metal, as is most things on the bike. So no deal breakers, but definitely things to bear in mind. What a stunning backdrop, eh? So to summarise, yes, I had a list of things that I gave a thumbs down, and it's not very powerful, and it's a bit agricultural, and there's virtually no technology. Oh, listen to that though. But you don't buy one of these for performance and traction control and all those gimmicks. You buy one of these because you want a proper motorbike, because you appreciate the simplicity, and because of the feeling it gives you when you ride. Because I'm telling you, you do not get that feeling with modern bikes. It stirs your passion, and it puts a massive grin on your chin. On paper, this bike is terrible, but in reality, it could be the best bike I've ever owned. Ladies and gentle pigs, thank you very much for watching. Anything I haven't covered, and if you've got any questions, fire away in the comments. Until next time, take care, ciao for now, and bye bye.